Hello, welcome back to another fine, cloudy day here in Eastern North Carolina. My name is Jason. This is Growing a Green Finger, and this is normally where I stumble around the garden, trying to do various gardening tasks, learning along the way because I'm a novice gardener, and I'm building a garden here in Eastern North Carolina, growing zone 8A on 1.5 acres. And normally, I don't do how-tos because I'm still learning myself, so I don't think it would be right for me to try to do a how-to on something involving almost anything gardening when I myself am still learning. But today I'm doing a how-to, and it's something I'm quite actually comfortable with, seeing as how I've built 7 Birdies beds up to this point. Now, Birdies bed is nothing more than a raised metal bed. It's made in Australia. It's designed by a gardener, made for gardeners. This video is not sponsored. It's not sponsored by Birdies. It would be nice if it was, but I didn't ask, and I just thought I would share my experiences with, again, you guys, whomever's watching, whomever cares to watch, as I build a Birdies bed. And I'll show you some of the things I've learned along the way, little tips and tricks. The other reason for doing this is I need the cardboard from this box to continue with my flower beds that are going along the driveway. I've completed one section, and I still need to do another section, but to do that, since they are no-dig beds, I need the cardboard to put down top of the grass. So with all that being said, let's get to constructing this Birdies bed. The boxes are all cardboard. There's no styrofoam in here, and there's very little plastic. And again, I'll go over all that as we get to each step. First step we're going to do, obviously, is open the box, as with any fun present or gift. You can then unpack the box as you wish. I just reached in and grabbed the first thing that I was able to grab easily was this edging. We're going to set this aside for the moment. You will need that later on. It's actually like the last step. The next thing I have here that I just reached in and grabbed is all the corner pieces. Next up are the instructions. The instructions are quite simple. One sheet. I'm not going to go over them step by step because there really is no step by step. One of the things they say right here is taking all the pieces out, laying them on the ground, removing the plastic. You can do that if you wish, or you can do it one at a time as I typically do. And again, I'll go over that as I go along. You do have to assemble the panels in a certain order, and essentially it's the corner pieces will always go to the outside. I'll show you more of that in a second. But the corner pieces will always go to the outside. Everything else will be to the inside of those corner pieces. And then the nuts and bolts, the head of the bolt will always face outside, the nuts will always go to the inside, and that's pretty much it. Now, this is an 8-in-1 bed, which means, I don't know if you could see that, there are 8 different ways to assemble this bed. Now, not all of the 8 different ways uses all the pieces, so just be mindful of that if you want a particular size or shape that they do, recommend or suggest. You may have a couple extra pieces, which is fine if that's what you want. So I myself prefer the largest bed size that I can get out of this, which means I will be using all of the pieces. A couple of things to note before we finish unpacking the box is you may want to get yourself a little tray of some sort. Any plastic tray that you can put all your nuts and bolts and whatnot in so they don't get lost. Also, if you haven't noticed, I'm assembling this in front of my garage on a cement pad. It's large, flat, clean surface that I can assemble this on, which makes life easy. If I did this out in the vegetable garden and I dropped a bolt, I'd never find it in the grass. Just never find it. So I'm assembling it here, and then at some point I will move it out into the veg garden and put it into its eventual location. The next few pieces I just grabbed out of the box are, I believe it's 4 long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 long and 2 short pieces. Obviously, difference in size. And again, get to that in a second. And then last but not least, always on the bottom, difficult to get to. Your parts. Depending upon now this is an 8-in-1 kit bed. The same basic steps I've gone through right now would work with any of their pieces. They make round pieces, short pieces, tall pieces. There's all sorts of beds that they make. The basics are all the same. I have 4 long threaded rods. I will show you that when we get to that step. And I have 2 short threaded rods, a bag full of nuts and bolts, and various other nuts and bolts which get used later on during the construction process. The box is totally recyclable, and again, I'll be recycling mine into the flower beds that I'm building out along the driveway. If you haven't seen my previous videos where I build those beds, go ahead, go back, watch those videos. The box starts its life in Australia, eventually makes your way to you, possibly here in the United States. It does get a lot of handling, and sometimes the side handles rip a bit or the box gets dinged up in other ways. Don't panic. These are fairly thick cardboard boxes. The product inside is, I would say, mostly intact. I'll touch on that in a second once we start to assemble. So the first thing is I like to start with my corner pieces. And what you're going to do is you're going to feel around the edges, and each piece is wrapped in a protective thin plastic coating. And you can take this plastic coating off at any stage you'd like. I like to do it before assembly. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a problem here. So you pick around the edges with your fingernails, you find a corner you can grab, and then you just, voila, peel it off. The plastic that you find in all these pieces is there to protect the enamel coating from being, again, the whole shipping thing being banged around. And again, a close-up. Find a corner, peel it off. Dispose of said plastic. And again, you do this to all your pieces. You could do it all at once, or you could do it as you assemble it. I just saw somebody on YouTube not too long ago who turned around and left all the plastic off. She just removed it from the edges of the birdie bed, left on the plastic to the very end once everything was fully assembled, then took it off. So do it as you like. Now, I did mention a second ago about your bed mostly arriving intact. The worst thing I've seen that happens to a birdie bed during shipping and handling is obviously the boxes get jostled around a lot, is your end, I don't know if you could see that, maybe a little bent in. This is not the world's strongest steel. I can usually just take my thumb, bend it out like that. It's not perfect, but what I do, and what I suggest you do, is make sure that's the bottom. So eventually it gets covered up with gravel or grass or whatever your ground cover is. It sort of hides that imperfection, and you'll never notice it's there. So just a little bend usually with the thumb straightens it out. And again, I always try to make sure that I put that on the bottom. Also, to make a quick note, that little imperfection there has no effect or no bearing on the structure of the bed itself. The bed is still fine. The metal just got a little bent. Once you assemble it all, it'll be very strong. Okay, now that we've gotten everything prepped and ready to go, now we're going to start assembling the bed. Let me show you what you're going to need next. So what I like to do, and again, I'll touch on this in a second, but I just want to make this as clear as possible. The Birdies beds do come with a little metal wrench, and that metal wrench will fit neatly onto the nut, and then you could use that. Now the nut does have like teeth on it, see that? And that'll become important later on. And this is your typical bolt. Okay, sort of a screw, panhead screw. But it's not really, well, it is a screw, I guess. Screw, bolt. I'm not a building expert, so don't quote me on this in the morning. So the first thing I like to do is start with the corner. And you can either start with a long piece or a short piece. Just doing a quick inspection, making sure everything is fine. The corner piece will go to the outside of the short piece. Same thing with the long piece. Your corners are always going to go to the outside. See that? And this is important for the strength of the bed. And what I like to do is just take one bolt, fish it through the hole right at the top so it's easy to reach. Throw a nut on. I'm just going to gently hand tighten it. We'll tighten up all the nuts and bolts later. And then maybe go down 3 or 4 holes and do the same. Push the screw through, and then the bolt or screw head will go on the outside, the nut will go on the inside, and just hand tighten them. So the outside piece here, the corner piece, the corner always goes to the outside. Take your nut, screw, bolt, fish it through the hole, drop a bolt, put your nut on, finger tight, and again, I probably go down about 3 or 4 holes, line up, put your screw through and the nut. Just finger tighten it. So now I've got one end of the bed basically done. Now there's still about a dozen bolts and nuts that need to go through this, but I'm going to now move on to the other sections. And the reason I'm doing this is I always like to go in, get the general bed assembled. With only a few bolts in each corner, puts the whole thing together. And once the whole thing together, then I come back and then I go and put in all the nuts and bolts. It's a very tedious process. So again, I like to get the general assembly of the bed done first, and then I'll come back and fill in all the remaining holes with the nuts and bolts. Also be aware, and they mention this in the instructions too, these holes aren't perfectly sized. There is play in this bed. The holes are a little bigger than the bolts that you're putting through the holes. Right. And this allows, again, for you to make slight adjustments because none of these pieces they guarantee to be 100% accurate. They do leave room for error. That wiggle room will come into play later as we're assembling the bed. So again, I'm going to keep repeating the process with the sides, and then we'll do the other end. So now your basic structure is put together. Well, the next step I'm going to do is take my tray full of bolts and nuts and run around and fill all the holes. Take note here again, depending upon the bed you have, whether it's the 8-in-1 or maybe one of the other fairly large ones, you do have these threaded rods. And they come with their own set of hardware, i.e. nuts, connecting nuts, and end cap nuts. Well, I'll call them end cap nuts because they sort of cap the end of the threaded rod. You do have to place these in the bed to give it strength on the sides. Otherwise, your bed would just bow outwards and it would look really silly. You don't want your bed looking silly. These rods are important. I'm going to show you real quick about assembling the rod and then the placements of the rod. In my case, because of the 8-in-1 layout that I'm doing, I need 2 long rods, which I have here. I then need a connecting nut. It's just a big nut. And then what I'm calling is the end cap nut, or the nut that goes at the end. It's got nice rounded end to it. Simply going to take your connecting nut and you're going to screw it onto the end here. Make sure it's about halfway down. Now you have 2 choices at this point. You can turn around and connect your rod all together, which I'm going to do, or you could wait, put each of these rods into the beds and then join them once it's inside the bed. Choice is yours. So for the ends, what you're going to do is you're going to take a washer, you're going to slip it on the end, then you'll take your, what I'm calling is the end nut or end cap nut, turn around and thread that on. May be a little tricky, maybe a little sticky. Make sure it's threaded all the way through and nice and firm. You don't need to wrench it down, finger tight is fine. And then what happens is that once you fish this through, this will prevent the bed from expanding outwards beyond a certain point. When you're done building your bed though, it may be stuck out like this. And don't panic though, because once you start filling it with material, it then blows out like that. And it'll catch on the washer and the nut and it won't expand beyond that point. Now, remember these instructions? Okay, I'm building this bed here and it says number 2 just takes the 2 long rods. But if I was building another bed, say this one, then it takes number 3, which is 2 long rods and a short rod. So again, depending upon the bed you're building, follow the instructions. It also notes here that the brace should be in the 3rd and 6th hole from the bottom. So when I put all those nuts and bolts in, I'm going to leave the 3rd, okay, 1, 2, 3, the 3rd hole. You could also do the 4th hole, either one, but the instructions say the 3rd hole from the bottom, okay, and the 6th. So 4, 5, 6. So again, I would probably go the 4th hole from the top. But again, you make that judgment call. It's your bed if you want to put your brace a little higher or a little lower. But the important thing is that you put both braces in and that they're spaced apart, because again, it helps prevent the side of the bed from blowing out. And now for the fun part, I get to turn around and put in 8 billion nuts and bolts. I'm not going to bore you with me putting in each and every single nut. We'll speed this along. Maybe we'll add some snazzy music to it. But I'm going to put in all the nuts that I can all the bolts that I can comfortably reach, and then I'll show you how I complete the bottom few nuts and bolts on each one. also a side note here is that I'm only making these finger tight. And again, we'll come back and we'll tighten all of them up at the end. I'll show you that as well, of course. One of the reasons that we're making them finger tight is that in case some of these holes don't quite line up, we jiggle the metal so that the holes do line up enough that the bolt goes through. Now that I'm done putting in all of the nuts and bolts for all the sides, and again, I left the 4th down and the 3rd up hole on the sides empty, and that was simply because, again, that's where my crossbars are going to go. Those threaded rods I showed you earlier. I still have a problem with the holes on the bottom. I need to put nuts and bolts in them. They're kind of a pain in the neck to reach when I'm all the way down there. I'm going to show you what I do, but this is not the only way to do it. In fact, I saw somebody else on YouTube do something differently. To reach some of those bottom holes, especially since I'm 5'9", the woman I was watching build a birdie bed was probably 5'4", so she had her husband help her lift up the birdie bed and put it on a picnic table. She put cardboard down on the picnic table so as not to scratch the enamel here, and then she put the birdie bed up on top of the picnic table. She was able to then get those few bottom holes done, and that method worked for her. If you have another method, or if you can think of another way to get to these holes that are on the bottom that are a bit pain in the neck, you could do that too. I could flip this if I wanted to. I actually need somebody else to help me do that, but I could flip this over. I did actually that with my round beds, but the round beds are smaller. They're easier for me to handle. This is larger and heavier for me to handle, but you could flip this and then do those bottom holes. I'm going to show you what I do. It's not the easiest way, but again, if you have another hint or tip or suggestion, please leave those comments below. Let me show you what I do now. So here's how I handle the hole that's on the very bottom. And again, this is what works for me. You do what works for you, and maybe you have a better way that you could share. But I simply lift the corner of the bed, put my foot underneath to act as a brace. You could use a piece of wood if you wanted to. Fish your bolts through, tighten your nut on, and there you go, it's on. And now, if you do this on the corner, you can just lean over and then get the other side of the corner at the same time. Repeat this for the other side, all the other corners and the middles, and then we'll get on to the next step. At this point, you should have all your screws into place, and the bed should be starting to look a lot firmer. Now, I've only finger tightened these, and I'll explain all that in a moment, but the one thing I do want to talk about or show you is, again, the threaded rods. I've already installed one, and I'm going to show you installing the second one. Remember those holes we left out on the side? Simply going to push the rod through, and I'm going to feed it back through the other side. So a little luck, there's rods sticking out on each side. So I have my washers and my nuts. So I'm simply going to put a washer on the end, and then the nut. Screw it on all the way until it feels tight. Simply doing the same thing to the other side. These nuts and washers on the threaded bars, it's just to prevent the sides from blowing out. We still have the problem of all the nuts and bolts that need to be tightened up because I've only applied them with finger tightness. So there's two ways to do this. You can use the Birdies wrench and go on the inside and hand tighten each nut like so. Or you can use a drill or power screwdriver, whatever floats your boat. But if you're going to use a power tool, please be careful. Set your tool to the lowest speed and then set your torque to like 5 or 6. I think that's what this is called. The number is up top here. I'm no expert. But again, be careful. If you feel comfortable using power tools, do this. If not, whatever you're most comfortable with, now's the time to tighten up that bed. Last step, this black edging. Birdies beds, they roll the edges of the metal here, but only on the top and the bottom. The sides are cut, so they're not rolled. So again, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, and I do apologize. Hopefully you haven't started assembling your Birdies bed yet, but use caution. This is sharp metal. The edges, the very corners, are a little sharp. It's one of the reasons why you're going to use this black edging. What we're going to do, so we don't hurt ourselves and it makes the bed look complete, is we're going to wrap this around the edge. This is pretty simple. You're just going to push this down onto the metal and you're going to work it all the way around. And I'll do a close-up shot of that so you can see some of the, again, issues you may run into when you're assembling or finishing off your Birdies bed. I'm going to start just to the side of this. This way when I finish, I'll come over this edge with the completed part. I could start here. It's just a little more difficult. We're just going to start right about here. Easy peasy. Work our way down. Now here's where it meets two pieces of metal. You're going to try to want to work this over both pieces of metal. Sometimes you can just get away with wiggling it back and forth a bit until you get it over that metal. And it's going to be tight, so you press it down and then just keep working it. And again, we come to another joint, so just try to work it over both pieces. A little wiggle and a jiggle. Birdies recommends that if you have problems getting over pieces like this, that you use like a butter knife to help pry the plastic apart and help work it over the pieces of metal. Again, just trying to wiggle it right over that joint, making sure you get both pieces of metal. Wiggle and jiggle over both pieces, I think. Yep. There we go. Okay, now for the final bit. Again, just going to wiggle it, ensuring it capture both edges. There we go. Okay, now we got to finish. And if you notice, we have a little extra bit. Every gardener should have these. Mine are a little crusty and dirty, so I do apologize for that. But essentially, you could use scissors too. Whatever works for you cutting. You're going to want to cut your strip and then just finish it off. Now, you're going to want to try to make this as tight as possible. Otherwise, what happens is, and it's not the end of the world, but again, heat expands and contracts, so you may find that your edging pulls back a little bit, and then you have a little bit of that exposed metal. Not the end of the world, but again, the tighter you make it, the better. So there it is. Birdies bed, built. Let me show you some of my other Birdies beds and point out some of the other things that I was talking about, and then explain about filling the Birdies bed. Okay, so here is one of my round beds, and you can see that this bit of stripping is kind of peeling off. Not the end of the world. You just push it back down. But you see there's a bit of a gap, and this is because I didn't pull this close enough. That gap actually shrinks a little bit during the heat of the summer. Eastern North Carolina, it can get to 110 on summer days. Pretty brutal. So this black plastic will expand a little bit. It really won't close up the joint, but either way, this will expand and contract. Now, they do make, again, a newer type of edging that you can get on Shop Epic Gardening that Birdies, because Birdies has realized this is a slight design flaw, so they make a new type, which is, I think, like more teeth on the inside, like plasticky teeth, which helps hold this down so it doesn't pry up. Okay, so that was my mistake on that bed, that I put that edge outwards because it's up against the fence. So let me show you a bed where I did put the plastic stripping towards the back to sort of hide it. And you can see right here, I have that gap. It's towards the back of the bed. I don't notice it unless I'm looking for it. Here's another example where I have the capping. There we go, just push it back. But you can see the gap that's left. Again, not the end of the world. And that was more my mistake than anybody else's. And again, if I really want to, I can go to Shop Epic Gardening. Again, not sponsored, just pointing out where I could go to get the, here in America, North America, to go get the improved edging. Enough about edging. How about filling the bed? Because that's just as important as building the bed. Over here, this bed, it's a new bed. If you've watched my previous videos, I just built this bed recently, and I have filled it with wood chips. Now, I've gotten the wood chips from trees that I cut down on the property last year. You basically want to fill your bed with, let's say, about 3/4 of wood chips, logs, branches, grass clippings, any sort of green waste material that you can fill the bed with. About 3/4 of the way full, maybe a little more if you want, because really most of your vegetables only need, let's say, about 6 to 8 inches, I think, to grow. If you want to go about a foot, go about a foot. But these are fairly tall beds. So if you fill it to me, let's say about there with wood chips, or again logs and wood chips or any green waste, and then you fill the remainder then with your potting mix, raised bed mix, that kind of thing, garden compost, then you save yourself quite a bit of money. And all this is all going to rot down. Self-Sufficient Me did a video, I believe it was last year, if I remember, or if you just go to his website and search, he dug up one of his beds that he had it sitting around for like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, something like that. And he had filled with logs and again, wood chips and all sorts of good stuff like that. He found most of the stuff was rotted away. What wasn't rotted was still rotting, which is great. All sorts of worms and microbes. Well, you can't see the microbes, but you kind of get what I'm talking about here. There's all sorts of good stuff in there. And that again only helps the plants in your raised bed grow. Speaking is hard. So as you can see, I have quite a few beds. I just built a new one today. I got the metal ones because I'm getting older, and probably another 5 years or 10 years, I wouldn't want to be bending over to pick stuff off out of the ground. So these are a good working height bed. You can go to shopepicgardening.com and you can see what beds that they offer that may work for you. That's it for today. I built a Birdies bed. I showed you how I did it, tips and tricks. If you have any questions, please leave them below. If you have any suggestions, things that maybe you've built a Birdies bed or similar, and you may have a suggestion on how to do it better than what I did today, please, again, leave those comments below. Let's share all that information. Don't forget to follow me over on Instagram. I often post pictures there that you won't see here on YouTube. And I think that's about it. I'm going to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.